Yesterday, I'm sorry, it was the day before where I was traveling. We were talking about Steve King, and there's a big kerfuffle. Obviously, the left is doing everything they can to get rid of Steve King and to tar Trump with Steve King's comments and to tar the entire Republican Party with what they consider to be Steve King's racism. And just to remind you, Steve King said in an article, he was quoted in the New York Times as saying, white nationalists, white supremacists, Western civilization, how did that language become offensive? Why did I sit in classes teaching me about the merits of our history and our civilization? Now, by the way, since we talked about it, King has claimed that he was screwed by the Times using dishonest punctuation, that what really happened was something like this. So there was no recording of it, and he's saying this is his memory of it, that the New York Times was saying, well, are you a white nationalist? Are you a white supremacist? And what he said, according to King, is he said, white nationalist, white supremacist, Western civilization. How did that language become offensive? In other words, he was saying, I'm not a white nationalist. I'm not a white supremacist. I'm defending Western civilization. Why is that offensive? And he pointed out that he said, why did I sit in classes teaching me about the merits of our history? They don't have classes teaching about the merits of white supremacy. So I don't know whether that's true or not. As I said before, King has said some things that I disagree with, that sort of that feel insular to me, that feel that they are attacking the very idea of inclusion that is, I think, part of the American idea. But I'm going to put that aside for now because that's not the point. The point that I was making the last time we talked about this was the New York Times, in an effort to tar Trump, in an effort to tar all Republicans, all conservatives as racist, they went and made this list of King's comments, among them his defenses of Western civilization as racist. And they said they implied that defending Western civilization was racist. Well, the Washington Post, not to be outdone, the Washington Post, where democracy dies in blithering ignorance and stupidity, actually put out an op-ed saying, you know what? It says Steve King, this is the headline, Steve King says he was just defending Western civilization. That's racist too. So the Washington Post, this is by David Perry, a journalist and senior academic advisor to the history department at the University of Minnesota. So he's saying defending Western civilization, that's racist too. He's coming right out and saying it. Let me read a little bit of this. Part of the project of modernity has been to justify itself. I don't agree with that statement, but let him run. During and after the Enlightenment of the 17th and 18th centuries, citizens of the monarchical European powers attempted to explain how they got to where they were by looking to their roots. They started from the idea that their world was better than what had come before. Europe had supposedly crawled out of the Dark Ages and into the light. Now, I agree with part of this. There is what I call the Enlightenment narrative, that the Middle Ages were dark, that the ages before the Middle Ages were dark, that the Middle Ages were in the middle, right? People who lived in the Middle Ages didn't think they were in the middle. They thought they were at the very cutting edge of modernity. But to the Enlightenment people, that was the Middle Ages because it came between classical civilization and this new wonderful Renaissance, the rebirth. That's what Renaissance means, the rebirth of classical civilization. So they use the terms dark and the Dark Ages. And he says, David Perry says, those familiar terms, dark and light, mirrored the value judgment behind this investigation of the past, one that selectively privileged white skin. That's absurd. Okay. Obviously, the darkness and the light were night and day, things that, are very difficult for people to deal with. When it's dark, it's harder to see, harder to survive. When it's light, you can move about. That's what they were talking about, had nothing to do with white skin. He then goes on to say, these were, after all, countries ruled by rich white men for other rich white men. So in searching for the history of the West, now that alone just sounds condemnatory. Would it be condemnatory to say that African countries were run by black people? I mean, it's absurd. So in searching for the history of the West, they ignored stories they didn't recognize, stories of people who didn't act, look, or think like them. He says they didn't pay attention to all those minorities that he, in his virtue, is paying attention to, and basically saying, he goes on to say, this history still undergirds the way many Americans think about Western civilization, and therefore, I mean, it's a very, very twisted, ridiculous argument. Therefore, when Steve King or anybody defends Western civilization, they're really defending the whiteness of Western civilization. This is an incredibly, by the way, I'm not saying that there weren't people who were very interested. All people are very interested in race. All people are very tribal. The wars of Europe which were between white people and white people, were racial wars. It was the English against the French. It was the French. It was the English against the Spanish. It was always people fighting from these different countries, and they made jokes about each other's races. They still do. They still talk about the different natures of German people and English people. It's only in America where we said, you know what? This is an exceptional country where we have an idea, and if you adopt that idea, you get to be a part of it. My point is this: David Perry's entire construction, his entire criticism, is created by Western civilization. It is created by this idea of Western civilization that we can all be as one if we follow certain ideas, right? This is the Jesus idea, that you're one person, people in Christ, no matter whether you're Jew or Greek, male or female, you are one person in Christ. This has permeated our culture. And I think this is the thing, that in attacking Western civilization, these morons are attacking Western civilization on premises that they would not know if it weren't for Western civilization, if it weren't for Christianity, if it weren't for these white people who did create these ideas. The fact that they were white is is not the important thing. If a tribe of blue people happened to invent fire, would you live in the dark because you didn't want to be blue? I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, sometimes history has lots of complications. It has lots of twists and turns, and we don't know why this particular civilization came up with these brilliant ideas. Maybe it was just the fact that God chose the Jews and planted Jesus there, and that spread throughout the Hellenic world. Maybe that's all it is. Maybe it's just like the chance. You know, we don't know what it is, why it is, but they're the ones who are concentrating on the whiteness. It is the people who love Western civilization who are not concentrating on the whiteness, but are concentrating on the ideas. And you can see this permeates the left, this hatred. It's a kind of a self-hatred in a way, this hatred of the basis of the civilization that formed even the thoughts they think, even the thoughts with which they attack Western civilization. Karen Pence, the wife of the second lady, the wife of the vice president, is teaching part-time at a private Christian school. And one of the policies of this school is that they will not hire you or keep you in the school if you commit acts of sexual immorality, among which they include homosexuality. So this now, they have just, the media, it's all in the media. Nobody said a word about this except the media. The media is going after Karen Pence for teaching at this school. I mean, that's an amazing thing. But listen to CBS. Here's the opening of CBS's report on the fact that the second lady teaches part-time.
Vice President Mike Pence's wife, Karen, has returned to teaching at a Christian school in Virginia where gay students and teachers are not welcomed. Here's Chip Reed.
I call my initiative Art Therapy Healing with the Heart.
Second Lady Karen Pence's decision to teach art part-time at Emmanuel Christian School in Northern Virginia has generated controversy. That's because the private elementary school's website says it may refuse admission or discontinue enrollment of a student if a parent or guardian violates a biblical lifestyle. Prohibited behavior includes participating in, supporting, or condoning homosexual activity. Likewise, employees, including teachers, can be fired for engaging in homosexual or lesbian activity or transgender identity. Those rules would appear to be consistent with the views of Vice President Mike Pence, a longtime critic of gay rights.
I hope you were listening. I hope if you've listened to the show enough, you learned to listen to phrases, passive phrases like has generated controversy. I think when you make that statement as a journalist, you should have to show that before any journalist got his hands on this, somebody thought this was a problem. In other words, has generated, and then it says school controversy on the the bottom third. All of that is generated by them. It is them creating this controversy. What's the controversy? It's a private Christian school with a fairly traditional idea about Christian values. And you can see Chris Cuomo. He does it too. I just have to play this because it's comical. What he says. He goes after Karen Pence as well.
Karen Pence is the wife of the vice president. She's teaching art at a place where the application requires would-be employees to initial next to a list of beliefs, including certain moral misconduct, includes homosexual or transgender identity as being disqualifying, or any other violation of the unique roles of male and female. Now, don't cheapen my argument by saying Cuomo's equating Christianity and white power. Please, that's just a slip of an obvious point. I am a flawed, failing, repentant Christian. okay? If I had any bias, it would be in favor of faith. The point is that the value of exclusion is embraced here.
So I'm not saying Christianity is white supremacy, but Christianity is white supremacy, the value of exclusion. This is a philosophy. This is a philosophy about how people should behave with their bodies. As you know, I don't entirely embrace this philosophy. I think that there is a broader way of looking at this on the same principles. I accept the principles of telos, of people having of things having purposes, and we should live into those purposes. But I think there's a broader way of looking at it. I don't agree with it, but it is traditional. It's been around for 2,000 years. And, you know, it's the fact that they single this out. Now, part of it is political. If she were a Democrat, they wouldn't even mention it. But it's really about it's also about the Christianity. It's always Christianity. Why? Because Christianity is mommy and daddy. Christianity formed our civilization. The Western European civilization began as Christendom. It began as the Christian nations united, tribes united by Christianity, and they cannot. It's a form of self-hatred. It's a form of unhappiness, but it is a form of hating Western civilization. They do not go to I mean, you know the kind of tenderness and delicacy with which they treat Muslims after yet another Islamic terror attack. They suddenly say, oh, we'll never know the motivations of the guy who's screaming, I'm killing you because of Allah. You know, we'll never know his motivations. No, it's Allah. No, we don't know your motivations. No, I'm telling you what it is. So they're so kind to those people, you know, not to spread prejudice against the entire religion, just to say the way they treat them is different than the way they treat Christianity. It is Western civilization they don't like. Why? Because they have a purpose. Their purpose is to acquire more and more power for the government, more and more power for the elites, and that is not what Western civilization, as it is embodied in the American idea, is all about. And that is why it's always the traditional things that they're trying to destroy. I mean, that, you know, my point is, it's the same thing with that Gillette commercial. The Gillette commercial attacking men. You know, they're selling razors and they're telling men stink, buy our razors. You know, you're a bully, you're a sexist, you are absolutely disgusting. Buy our razors. We love you. You know, and that's what they're saying. And I love Kirsten Powers comes on. I don't know what's happened to her. She's gone loony. You know, she used to be a little bit more balanced. Maybe it's Trump has driven her crazy, but suddenly she's this far leftist. She goes on CNN and she says, I cannot understand. I cannot understand why anybody would be upset by this commercial.
Well, it's fragile, and they're privileged, again, to go back to this, that they expect to not be criticized, that any kind of criticizing of them crosses a line. It's an assault on them. It's an attack. They don't want to be held accountable. So I think that if you're somebody who's having a sort of triggering reaction to this, you might want to take a look at yourself and ask why that is. Because what is it about treating women with respect and equality that's so offensive to you? And what is it about sending different kinds of messages to little boys that they don't have to be fighting and acting in what this sort of, it is toxic masculinity. That's not actual masculinity. That's not what masculinity is. And so I would just say, if you're upset about this, maybe ask yourself why.
Well, thanks to Kirsten Powers for explaining to me what masculinity is. But, you know, it's like nobody says men can't be criticized, and men criticize men all the time, and they criticize men's behavior, other men's behavior all the time. And of course, men who act like jerks and pigs get a lot of flack from other men, as well they should. But when you're selling us razors, essentially making the point that well, it did say white men, it did make it look like it was only white men, but essentially making the point that men themselves, masculinity itself is toxic, that the aggression that sometimes overflows in masculinity is a bad thing, that the sexuality that has caused the world to continue to reproduce is a bad thing. It is offensive. It's demonizing, and they can take their razors and stick them. But, and at the same time, the traditional roles of women trigger these people. This is amazing. You know, Trump had this thing, the Clemson football team that won the NCAA championship came over, and he said, well, the government is closed, so we don't have chefs, so he sent out for Big Macs. Trump said he was going to pile up the Big Macs for a mile high, and the Washington Post seriously ran a 1,200-word fact check proving with graphs that Big Macs would not pile up a mile high if he ordered enough to feed the football team. But anyway, as he was presenting these Big Macs to the football players, he mentioned that he thought this would be better than having the First Lady make them a salad. Here's that clip and CNN's insane reaction.
Do we have no food for you because we have a shutdown? Or do we give you some little quick salads that the First Lady will make along with along with the second lady, they'll make some salads. And I said, you guys aren't into salads. Or do I go out, Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott, do I go out and send out for about 1,000 hamburgers, Big Macs? So we actually...
That's appalling. It seems to me like the president will not be happy until there is not one single female Republican voter in the country. It's incredibly sexist. It also, I mean, I don't know why I'm stuck on this, but Ivanka is not the second lady. She is actually, I don't think she deserves this position. She's actually a senior advisor to the president. So the idea that he would demean her specifically in that way, he shouldn't talk about the first lady that way. We aren't all here to make salads for men. It's disgusting. I mean,
You know, if she thinks that that's going to alienate all of the Republican female voters, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Let me tell you something. Making food for people, for your family, making a home for your family, being a mom to your children is approximately 500,000 times more important than mouthing off on CNN or the Daily Wire or doing what I do, doing what I'm doing right now. I mean, these are the things, everything on earth. C.S. Lewis said this, and he's absolutely right. Every other trade on earth is built to support that effort, to support the effort of women making homes for people and shaping the lives of children. That is, you know, their disdain for this. So they hate traditional gender roles. They hate men. They hate traditional women. They hate traditional religion. They hate Western civilization. No wonder they don't want a wall to defend any of it. What is there to defend? This is the thing that makes this battle between Trump and Pelosi, Trump and the Democrats. This is the thing that makes it bigger than just a question of whether there's a wall. It is, what are these people thinking, and why do they hate us, the West, and ultimately themselves so much?